In this video, I'm going to show the shark dissection and compare it to two other lineages of fish. So we're going to start out with the lamprey. Lampreys are agnathan fishes, and they are some of the oldest vertebrates living on the planet. In fact, the only one that's a little bit older are the hagfish. So these guys evolved before there was bone, before there was paired fins. In some ways, they even retain some traits that we see in Amphioxus. Okay, so we'll start out with the parts of the lamprey, or the main parts. So right now you're looking at the head of the lamprey. And since I mentioned Amphioxus, I'll just point out two things that they share with Amphioxus. So you may remember in Amphioxus, its sense organs are not paired. And in lampreys, I mean, they're vertebrates, even though they're very primitive vertebrates, so they do have paired sense organs. However, some of them are still not paired. Like you see this white spot here. This is called the pineal organ. In us, it becomes a gland inside of our brain. Sometimes people call this the pineal eye, but it doesn't form images of any sort, but it definitely measures like day length and probably sets things like circadian rhythms and controls when the reproductive organs are going to be mature. In other words, it sort of tells the animal whether it's spring or fall, whether there's how long the day is, that sort of thing. Now, right in front of it, there is a single nostril. We refer to it as the median nostril. So inside of there, there's an olfactory sac that works just like your nose. So that's similar to the olfactory pit that you see in Amphioxus, and it's in about the same location. Okay, now other sense organs, however, are paired. Like the lamprey has two eyes. This is one of them. There's a set of bumps on the face, which are the lateral line system. They're kind of hard to see in this specimen. I think you can see them better in some of the photographs I put on D2L for you. All right, if you look back here, you can see gill slits, and it is okay to call them gill slits rather than pharyngeal slits because there are actually gills associated with them. So you may remember in Amphioxus, it doesn't have any gills, so it has pharyngeal slits and pharyngeal bars supporting it. Here we have actual gill slits. Well, you could still call them pharyngeal slits. There's nothing wrong with that. They definitely open into the pharynx of this animal. All right. Now, let's see. The other thing I wanted to say is this creature has no jaws, and that's where it gets the name of the group Agnatha, meaning without jaws. You may remember the gnatho bases that we saw in horseshoe crabs. That's the same root that means jaw. And if you put an A in front of it, it means without. All right, so how does it feed? Well, these guys as adults are predators. The juveniles are filter feeders. And I have a photograph of the juvenile in the practice practical. But let's take a look at what they use to feed with. So if you look inside the buccal funnel here, you can see that the inside of it is lined with these orange structures. What those are teeth, and they are made out of keratin. So remember, this guy is so old that it evolved even before bone evolved, and there's no bone anywhere in its body. So instead, hard structures in its body are made of two other compounds. So keratin is used here. Keratin is the same thing your fingernails are made out of and your hair is made out of. Inside the body, there's cartilage. So there's a cartilaginous skeleton supporting, there's actually like a brain case. If you look, and also, some vertebra that extend above the notochord. If you look deep inside of here, you can see there's a tongue, and the tongue has also got keratin on it. It's sort of, the keratin there is shaped almost like a scraper. And what these animals do is they attach onto a fish and they hold with these keratinized teeth. those leave a pretty nasty wound in the body of the fish. And then they use their tongue to open a hole in the body of the fish and then they suck out fluid. Okay, so that's how they feed. They have nothing to bite with, so they have no jaws and they have no bone. All right, so just looking at the rest of the animal, you can see it's mostly eel-like, but it does have a few fins. Now, importantly, the fins in the agnathan fishes are not paired. So they only have single fins. This would be a dorsal fin. And back here, you see a second dorsal fin. And then there's a caudal fin. This species doesn't really have a ventral fin. You can see the anus there. So notice that there is an actual tail behind the anus. That's one of the chordate characteristics, a post-anal tail. All right, the other thing I wanted to show you is the notochord. So just like Amphioxus, this animal has a notochord. That's what that tissue is right there. Now, there are vertebra, but in something like humans or even the other fish we're going to look at, vertebra replace the notochord. This animal its vertebra consists of little arches of cartilage. We can't really see them in this picture, but they're little arches of cartilage that are located above and below the notochord in some areas. They protect the nerve cord, which is this little line here just above the notochord. So this is notochord, the thick stuff, and the little line above it is the nerve cord. So the notochord here, it is the primary skeletal component that runs the length of the body, and it is somewhat flexible. These guys swim like snakes. Like I say, the notochord is going to get replaced by vertebra in most other chordates, but it's still present in the lamprey just like it is in Amphioxus, which is not really a chordate. No, I'm sorry, it is a chordate, it is not a vertebrate. Okay, so now we're going to take a look at the sharks. All right, I'm going to move the the lamprey, and we'll take a look at these sharks here. Okay, so we will start out with external anatomy, and then we'll take a look at the internal anatomy. All right, so these are spiny dogfish, and it looks like the spines have been removed from these specimens. Normally a spine would be up here in the front of the fin, and I don't think any of them actually have that. Usually the supply companies remove a spine that they use for protection. At any rate, we're going to take a look at some of the external parts of this guy. All right. So first of all, we'll look at the main divisions. So if you look at these fins, these are attached to something called the pectoral girdle. And in front of the pectoral girdle is the head. All right. From the pectoral girdle back here to these paired fins, that's the pelvic girdle. This is called the trunk. Okay. And then behind the pectoral girdle, the pelvic girdle, which is where the anus is located, we have the tail. So the rest of this would be tail. All right, so some of the fins have the same name. So just like in a lamprey, there's a dorsal fin, and this has an anterior dorsal fin and a posterior dorsal fin, all right, further back. And then there's a caudal fin, all right. So on this caudal fin, the one thing that's typical of lots of sharks is that the top part, in fact it's typical of almost all sharks, but the top part of the fin is longer than the bottom part of the fin. This is what is called the heterocercal shape. All right. So just to show you the opposite of that, in bony fish, we see a homocercal shape, like you see in this perch, where the top of the caudal fin is about the same length as the bottom of the caudal fin. This bony fish also has dorsal fins. All right. There is a anal fin, it's called. All right. And then if you look at these, this is where its pectoral girdle is located. So pretty far up compared to the shark. We'll look at the shark's pectoral girdle in a minute. Notice these fins are paired. There's two of them. They're kind of stuck to the body. And then I'm sorry, pelvic girdle. Okay, so this is the pectoral fin. So they're paired. So the pectoral girdle is up here, pelvic girdle there. You have the anus a little further back. All right, going back to the shark. All right, so the paired fins. So these are the pelvic fins attached to the pelvic girdle. And then up here we have the pectoral fins attached to the pectoral girdle. Now this is a male shark. One way you can tell it's a male shark really quickly is to look at these thickened edges to the pelvic fins. Those are called claspers, and they are used in copulation. Okay, females don't have that. All right, so let's see now. We'll talk about some of the sense organs at this point. All right, so if you look at the head closely, on the underside, you'll notice there's a pair of nostrils. Now, you know, in us, our nostrils open into our mouth, which is why, you know, you can breathe with your mouth shut. You can breathe through your nostrils. That is not the case in sharks or fish, most fish anyway. Instead, you have water comes in here, passes into a pouch, and then leaves on this side. There's a little division, a little septum here that allows water to just flow in one direction. Now, another thing you can probably see are these little dots in the skin here. And sometimes if you push on them, I don't know if you can see that in this video, but this gelatinous stuff comes out. They are also on the dorsal surface of the skin on the head. Those things are called the ampullae of Lorenzini, and they are a specialized electroreceptor that allows sharks to sense weak electrical fields. All right, so let's move further back. Another sense organ, well, you can see the eyes here. Those are paired and really well developed in sharks. All right, there's a line that runs along the body. This is the lateral line system. So remember, lampreys had that as well, but theirs are restricted to little bumps on the face. What these two things do, the bumps on the face of the lamprey and the lateral line here, is they sense pressure and movement of water. Fish use it for schooling. Like if you look at this bony fish, it's hard to make out, but you can kind of see there is a line there. That's the lateral line in the bony fish. And they use it for the same reason. Now, just like in the lamprey, the lateral line system does occur on the face, and it occurs on the face of the shark as well. It's pretty difficult to see in a film like this. I mean, you really have to reflect the skin to find the little neuromast organs, they're called. All right, so now let's take a look at the gills briefly. All right, so in a shark, you can see the gills the gill slits have open external gill slits, just like in a lamprey. Whereas in a bony fish, there's something called an operculum here. That's this bony plate that actually covers the pharyngeal arches and the gills. So I'd have to, maybe I could cut that open really quickly so you can see the gills underneath there. Give me just 1 minute here. All right. Well, there are the gills of the fish underneath where the operculum was. All right. Okay, so another thing about the sharks is, in addition to those external gill slits, they have one gill up here in something called the spiracle. It's a very small hole. It's not real well developed in these sharks. It's huge in some of the rays that spend a lot of time sitting on the bottom. So that also moves water into the pharynx, and there, like I said, there's a gill in there, so they get some respiration through the spiracle. This larger female I have, the spiracle is a little better developed, so I'll see if you guys can see that. A little larger there, right behind the eye. Okay, so while we've got this female, I actually cut open one of its gill pouches so we can see what's inside of there. All right, so I did that by taking these scissors, sticking them in along the edge here on the top and the bottom, and just sort of cutting the skin. So if we now lift that up, we can actually see the gill inside of there. All right, so what you are looking at here, these black flaps here, those are called the gill lamellae. And then right there is a pharyngeal arch, sometimes just called a gill arch. And then it's kind of hard to see in this in this video, but sticking in from the gill arch are things called gill rakers. They're little white triangular things. And inside of there, that is the an internal gill slit that opens into the pharynx. All right? So the way water works here is, you know, the sharks usually swim with their mouth open. Water enters through their mouth and then exits the pharynx through these internal gill slits. As it's doing that, it runs across the gill lamellae where gas exchange takes place, and then it leaves via these external gill slits. Like I say, the spiracle also has gill lamellae inside of it, and some water can pass out through there. All right? Okay, now, I think we are ready to look at the internal anatomy. We've been over all the parts here. So I'm going to go back to the male. That female is gravid, so it's a little, or I'm sorry, not gravid, pregnant, we should say. So we'll come back to her in a minute. So we're going to start out with the male here. So it kind of takes a while to cut this open, so to save time, I did that before I started making this video. So I cut along the midline here, and then I cut up onto the side so I can lift up, you know, these flaps lining the body cavity. All right. So when you open this, there's a space inside of here. This is the coelom, like we've heard before. And you can see the coelom is lined in this shiny tissue. That's the same tissue that other animals with true coeloms have. It's called the peritoneum. Now, the peritoneum is on the body wall where it's called parietal peritoneum, but it's also on the organs where it's called visceral peritoneum. And if you lift organs up, you usually see that they are suspended from the top of the body by these sheets of tissue. These sheets of tissue are called mesenteries. And what they are is they are a continuation of the peritoneum. So a mesentery connects the parietal peritoneum to the visceral peritoneum. Okay. And there's a whole bunch of these mesenteries. They all have different names, but in a general zoology class, we don't really try and learn the names of all the mesenteries. That's something that's covered in comparative vertebrate anatomy. All right, so let's take a look at what we have inside of the shark. Now, when you open the shark, like most vertebrates, you usually see this giant gray organ. It's usually the largest organ inside the body of any vertebrate. This is the liver. So in the shark, its liver consists of 3 lobes. There are these, I'm actually going to remove one of these pectoral fins just so it won't get in our way here. Give me just a second. All right, so the liver has these 3 lobes. There's these 2 lateral lobes, and then there's a medial lobe. Now, the medial lobe has a little sac on its surface, which is sometimes green, and that sac is called the gallbladder. So in us and in the frog that we'll see in a different dissection, the gallbladder is usually this big green sac that's really obvious. It's not so obvious in sharks, but this is where it would be located. And then down here, there's a bile duct that carries bile down to the beginning of the intestine, which is in this area. We'll look at it in a minute. Okay, so since I just cut this fin off, I wanted to tell you guys a thing or two about it. So in the fin, it has fin rays supporting it, but they're actually made of keratin. Whereas if you look at these fins in the bony fish, they also have fin rays. The fin rays are these bony structures that support the fin. You see those? Those are made of bone in a fish. So sharks have actually lost almost all the bone in their body. They still have it in their teeth and in their scales. And then some sharks have a certain amount in the the vertebra, like that's the case with this guy. I mean, the vertebrae are not entirely bony. They're mostly cartilaginous. But in most of the body, there's cartilage now on the internal skeleton. Don't think of that as a primitive character. The ancestors of the sharks had bony skeletons, and the sharks have, for whatever reason, lost most of the bone in the internal skeleton. So we call them cartilaginous fishes, chondrichthyes. This, on the other hand, this perch, this is a bony fish. It's an osteichthyes because almost its entire skeleton is bony, both internally and externally. Okay, now let me go back to the internal organs. Sorry about that, I just didn't want to forget about it. Okay, so we've got the liver here. All right, now most of the rest of this is the digestive tract. So we're going to sort of follow along the gastrovascular cavity. So notice there's this big fat tube here that sort of comes down and then curves back up and goes to here. Right there, there's this hard muscular thing, which is called the pylorus, all right, or the pyloric valve, sometimes people call it. It's hard because it's a muscle. And what it does is it separates the intestine from the stomach. Okay, so the stomach in a shark is J-shaped like this. It's not really J-shaped in us. It's more of just a big round sac. And it's, as you can see, it's pretty long. There's some more mesentery between the two parts of the stomach. Now, hanging off of the stomach is this big sort of blackish or dark gray organ. That's called the spleen. Don't confuse it with the liver. It looks similar, but it's not, and they have very different functions. All right, so down here, you can see, like I said, the intestine here. Now, sitting on the surface of the intestine, it's a little weird looking in this specimen, but this sort of tan organ there, that's the pancreas, and the pancreas generates enzymes that get added to the intestine. So it has little ducts that carry these enzymes to a position just after the pylorus. The pancreas has this ventral lobe here, but then there's also a dorsal lobe, which is usually much bigger. So it should be on this side somewhere. Pretty difficult to see in this specimen. Perhaps I can find it in the female a little better. Let's take a look here. All right, so here's the female specimen. We have a lot of the same stuff going on. So there's the spleen running along the intestine there. Here's the pancreas, and there is a dorsal lobe of the pancreas right there. So the more I look at these sharks, the more I'm realizing that I don't think they're actually spiny dogfish. Like, this is another species of shark that is also similar to spiny dogfish. All right, but let's, sometimes we get other species from the supply companies. I'm not really sure what this is, but we'll call it the spiny dogfish, or dogfish for short. All right, let's see now. So some other organs we can see inside the body. In the back here, so if we keep following the digestive tract down, like I say, this is the intestine. We're going to open that up in a minute. You can see it's fairly short. It's really long in us. You know, it might be like 25 feet long in a human, but pretty short here. All right, now at the end of the intestine, there's a really short portion here that is no longer distended. That's called the rectum. And then it would open in an anus inside of what we call a cloaca. So this opening here between the the pelvic fins is a cloaca, like we saw in sea cucumbers. You may remember they have a cloaca. So you have waste from the digestive tract emptying here. You also have waste from the urogenital system, meaning urine. And it is extruded through this little papilla in here. This is called the urogenital papilla. Babies also pass out of a shark there, so I'm going to show you the urogenital papilla of the female, which is really distended because she's pregnant. So if you look inside the cloaca of this female, you can see this large thing sticking up here. That's the urogenital papilla. Really big. So I have a photograph of a urogenital papilla in the practice practical. All right, let's see what else we need to cover here. So we've been through the glands, okay. I'm going to show you the pericardial cavity really quickly. All right, so in a shark, the coelom has two components, all right, or two divisions. This large area that we've been looking around in, that's called the pleuroperitoneal cavity. So in humans and other mammals, we have separate pleural cavities and peritoneal cavities. So in us, the pleural cavities have the lungs in it, and then the peritoneal cavity has everything from the liver back, basically. But in sharks, there's only one of those cavities. Now there's another division of the coelom though. So if you come up here to an area just in front of the liver, let me make sure people can see this here on the camera. There's a partition there, which we can sort of barely see here. If we like pull the liver out, we might be able to see it a little better, but there's a little white partition there. So I'm going to pull out some of the liver so you can see it a little better there. See that white partition? That is called the transverse septum, and it divides the coelom into these two parts. So pleuroperitoneal cavity behind it, or posterior to it. In front of it, we have the pericardial cavity. So that's this space here. Now I also opened this in the female, and I was able to see things a little better there. So I'm going to switch these sharks out again. So we'll take a look at the female's pericardial cavity. It opens up a little bigger. She's a little bit larger specimen. All right. Now inside of the pericardial cavity, we have the heart. Now in sharks, the heart has two chambers. So this ventral chamber here, that's sort of light colored, it's light colored because it's really, really muscular. But underneath it, you can see there's a black chamber. That's the atrium. And the atrium is mostly just like a sac that fills up with blood and holds the blood until the ventricle can pump it out. Okay, so pericardial cavity, pleuroperitoneal cavity, that's the ventricle. The dark one is the atrium. All right, so let's see. What else we need to cover here? All right, I wanted to show you a little bit about the urogenital system. So we'll take a look at it first. All right, we'll go back to the male first because it's less complicated. All right, so if you look on either side of the stomach up here, there's that piece of liver that I removed, you'll notice that this specimen has these elongate organs here. Those are testes, and there's a pair of them. All right, so there's one on the other side there. All right, now the kidneys of this animal actually are this band of stuff here. All right, it's kind of not real obvious, but maybe you can make out there's a band there. It's not so obvious because we have the peritoneum covering the kidneys. So the kidneys actually run the length of the back here. They're just on the other side of the peritoneum. So they're like a pair of thickened bands right underneath the spinal cord. Maybe we'll see how they look in the female. She's a little larger. All right, so let's take a look at the female. All right. Now, this female is pregnant, so she has these really large sacs here on either side of the digestive tract. See, there's another one. Those are oviducts, and she's already got young babies inside of here, so I'm going to open this and show you one of them. All right. Here's a baby shark taken from the oviduct of this female. Okay, so just give you an idea. Now, so sharks, they have internal fertilization. That's another big difference from most bony fish. Most bony fish have external fertilization. So the female lays eggs in a little nest, and then the male comes along and sprays sperm on it. These guys, on the other hand, the males use those claspers to hold on to the female. They use the urogenital papilla to propel sperm inside of the female's reproductive system. And then babies develop inside the oviducts. Now, in some species, the babies even eat each other. So it's kind of like the baby that develops first actually eats its brothers and sisters. so that maybe only one will be given birth